Los conceptos vertidos en este espacio son de exclusiva responsabilidad de la persona o institución que los emite.
Ahora empieza su programa, el show del Dr. Roy Aranda. Temas sobre los efectos que tiene la separación de los niños de sus padres, traumas que afrontan los indocumentados, violencia doméstica, el porqué de la violencia en las escuelas. Llámanos en vivo al 1-888-900-2811, extensión 6 y haz tus preguntas al aire. ¡Comenzamos!
Good evening, buenas noches. Today is the first show in English. We're going to be doing the show once a month in Spanish, once a month in English. Esta noche, febrero 21, estamos haciendo el show por primera vez en inglés. Una vez al mes lo haremos en español y una vez al mes en inglés. I just wanted to go over, quería repasar brevemente, the purpose of having this program. I created it in August of last year. Se inició este programa agosto del año pasado. It was my idea to provide a means, a tool, of empowering our communities, un método de brindar educación e informes necesarios para las comunidades hispanas, with the hopes of having the audience, the viewers, learn things of interest and concepts of important social issues that are important to them, educational, health-related issues that are of importance to them, that serve to empower them. Brindar un apoyo educacional sobre temas de salud mental, de salud físico, de temas de sociocultural. So, my idea is really to reach out to as many viewers as possible. Quiero pues que el show sea accesible a muchos, a hispanos, pero también a los no hispanos. I want to make it available to people who are more Spanish dominant, as well as people who are more dominant in English. I'm really trying to reach as many people as possible. So, to an extent, it's an experiment, viene siendo un experimento, so tengo la esperanza que sea algo útil para todos. I hope it's a useful tool for all of you. Tonight, our show, our presentation is, we're going to be examining the psychological impact of the government shutdown. It was the longest in the history of the United States, 35 days long. It went from December 22nd, 2018, days before Christmas and New Year's, and did not end until January 25. It affected hundreds of thousands of employees, and it affected millions and millions of people living in the United States. Next week, February 28th, la próxima semana, febrero 28, we will have our second show. And on that program, which is called in Spanish, Mejorando el Sistema de Justicia para Todos, in English, Reforming the Justice System for All, I will have three guests, three attorneys. Jose Nieves, who is a candidate for Queens District Attorney, Adam Tavares, an immigration attorney, and Vivian Cedeño, an attorney who practices criminal law. So, la próxima semana tendremos a tres abogados, el licenciado José Nieves, que es candidato para fiscal del condado de Queens, el abogado Adam Tavares, especializado en la ley de inmigración, y la abogada Vivian Cedeño, abogada de casos de criminalidad. So what I wanted to do today is to introduce our guests. We have a marvelous, marvelous guest, a good friend of mine, a wonderful, highly educated, and well-traveled and experienced psychologist, Evelyn Rappoport. She has a doctoral degree in psychology, and again, the topic for today is the psychological impact of the government shutdown, and I couldn't pick a better guest since Evelyn, who's a good friend, specializes in many, many aspects of trauma. So without further ado, Evelyn, please greet the viewers.
Thank you so much, Roy, for having me here and for including me in what is a really important discussion that I think affects us all. So I really do appreciate being included. And the trauma of the event that you're about to describe has many, many long-term effects. And I think we should get into it as soon as possible.
Tell us a little bit about your background, who you are. I know you travel a lot and you've been to Israel. The viewers have no idea about that. You have an office, I believe, I think it's Manhattan, yes?
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about yourself briefly. I know you can fill a book with all your accomplishments.
Well, I will only fill a paragraph at best right now. I have a degree in both psychology as well as in psychoanalysis, a postdoctoral in psychotherapy and psychoanalysis, and a specialization in trauma resolution. I work with multiple different kinds of traumas with diverse populations, including war traumas and major catastrophes. I do a lot of consulting in New York City and in Jerusalem, Israel. I'm affiliated and supervised at Hadassah Hospital in Jerusalem, and I do a lot of consultations and teaching in terms of how to work with trauma, as well as on an individual level, on a family level, and certainly on a group level. I'm involved in a number of trauma organizations. I work with first responders, I'm happy to say, and with community organizations, especially with emotional first aid protocols in the immediate aftermath of a trauma. So I bring all of that to you tonight, and I'm happy to really be part of this experience. It means a lot to me, so thank you.
We're conducting the show in 3 segments for today. We're first going to be taking a look at the actual impact, the impact itself, how many people were affected. We're going to be then looking at what the effects were. We saw on television and in the news media a lot of discussion about people not working, loss of income, fear of having to lose their places where they live, fear of not being able to pay rent, not being able to pay for medication, food. These were some of the monetary kinds of consequences. But we didn't really hear too much. There wasn't too much of a focus, regrettably, on the actual psychological, the emotional trauma, the emotional impact. That's going to be the second part. We'll be looking at what were the psychological consequences, the emotional consequences, and we'll wrap up really with some suggestions about what can be done in general to help emotional recovery when people are experiencing a trauma. And I consider this to be a trauma, one of the biggest traumas that I've witnessed in my life. So, Oscar, could you please put the first slide?
So I'd like to add something to that, if I may.
Sure. We're going to have the first slide. There it is.
Okay. But what you said is so accurate, because the financial toll of this shutdown has been pretty well documented, although we don't have all of the information in.
There's a lot of information. I apologize. I squeezed way too much information on the slide. But fortunately, you're going to be able to. It's being recorded, so you'll have access to this tomorrow on YouTube, on Vimeo, on Tribuna TV, and I believe also on Facebook. So you'll be able to take a closer look at it. But certainly, just very briefly, and then I'll turn it over to you for some comments, and I'll intersperse with questions. We heard that there were 800 federal employees who went without wages. So it's 800 federal employees who were affected. But that's sort of a underestimate, because we had many contractors who who were impacted. We had consumers of these services who were impacted. It affected really hundreds of thousands of people. The figure that I have is approximately a cost of $11 billion to our economy. We witnessed federal employees calling in sick. More towards the end of the shutdown, we were hearing concerns about airports where flights were being canceled, parts of the airports were being closed. We were hearing that our travelers were at risk. I mean, can you imagine people providing for our safety and risk safety professions that are federal employees not going to work? Food inspections weren't being taken care of as significantly as usual. The screening of flights, people who had to come to work without salary, and you can imagine that they're tired. It caught employees decided that they had to leave perhaps and retire, look for other kinds of jobs and means for making money. So we had huge consequences. Again, I did list it. I apologize that it comes out somewhat small on the screen. I know that Dr. Rappoport, you have a copy of this as well. So I open it to you for some comments. What were some, if you have to add, what were some of the impact that you're aware of? And again, I'm positive that it was millions and millions who were affected, not just this 800,000 figure that we're hearing.
Absolutely. And I would like to say something about what trauma does and the impact of trauma in general. We're calling this a trauma because it is a sudden, unpredictable event which has created a threat to the very people who support the government, and the overall experience of feeling somewhat betrayed because they are the very people who are actually on the front lines. And the feeling was that they were held hostage in some sort of transaction here. And the unpredictability of it and the shock of it is what resonates still today. The emotional toll of the trauma, the fear that erupted, the anxiety, the sense of helplessness in people who did not know what to expect and when anything would open up, and the sense of absolute abject helplessness was the strongest emotional toll that one could have. Working families...
We've had many government shutdowns before, but this is by far the longest.
But this one is the longest.
And it happened.
And by the way, yes, I'm sorry, Roy.
I'm going to guess that for people who employees and employers and consumers of federal services who are seasoned and have been on the workforce for many years, they're no strangers to having lived through shutdowns before. But I'm going to guess that for many people, they were sort of hoping and not really believing that there would be a shutdown. And exactly. I can't imagine what the impact was hearing on December 22nd for those who celebrate the Christmas holidays, and certainly many people above and beyond the Christmas holidays celebrate New Year's. And why on earth would you want to start 2019 unemployed? I have to believe that must have caused a tremendous amount of anguish. Evelyn, your thoughts?
Well, I think a tremendous amount of anguish doesn't even capture the emotional consequences and the fear and the anxiety that got activated, as well in families, as well as in children. The lack of safety, the lack of security, the lack of food on the table affected everyone. I want to just say something. You know, there's a lot of research on the impact of these shutdowns. For example, in 2013, we had a 16-day shutdown, and the research found that this this one of 16 days, a forced work stoppage resulted in decreased life satisfaction, increased work-family conflict, and physical, cognitive, and emotional burnout for people at least 5 weeks after the shutdown ended, and 5 weeks is a mild estimate. Now, that was 16 days. So imagine double that and plus more to 35 days. And the problem is the threat is still there, because one way or another, we're being told that in lieu of a shutdown, certain things are happening. What does that mean, in lieu of a shutdown? It involves the possibility of another shutdown. So it's like the clouds are hovering, and there is no sense of safety at this point for these people. Now, we also know that widespread unemployment, which this is, and economic uncertainty, which this has given rise to, has been linked to immediate short-term spikes in suicide and car collisions, and that individual job uncertainty, such as has happened here, has been linked to depressive symptoms and mental health problems in individuals, spouses, including their children. So the stress hormones in individuals rise as the stress of the shutdown kept increasing. And what happens is, when that happens on an individual basis, a person is more at risk for poor health outcomes, high blood pressure, physically and physiologically, insomnia. And as it gets longer, these consequences of stress can compound, and they make people more likely to make mistakes, to become distracted, to become depressed, and to shut down themselves. So you have a shutdown leading to more shutdown in people. And the thing about trauma is, the trauma isn't necessarily the event itself. It's in how it happened, the shock that occurred, and the trauma continues to ripple through people down to the next generation, and sometimes even to the third generation, our research showed that. But because repair is not available in a short window of time. So even after people are back to work, even after they receive back pay, the negative experiences continue to be felt, as do the mental health issues. I have a number of quotes from different people that I think speak to this, that bring it home, so to speak. But first, I'll let you just share some more, Lord.
I did want to mention that when we had other government shutdowns that ended, they ended without a temporary fix. This shutdown of 35 days ended with a temporary fix. In other words, we were given a short window that somehow our government needed to come up with a solution that would keep the government open. And that short of arriving at that solution, there was a possibility of another shutdown, which the way I see it would really have amounted to a continuation of the shutdown, because the apprehension and the period of uncertainty during that, what was it, a 15-day or something like that, period of time, really adds to the 35 days. So it's really more like about a 50-day. As I see it, more of a 50-day period of like really bewilderment and not knowing what's happening. And when you consider the number of days in a year, that's a rather large segment. Oscar, since we're getting into some of the effects, let me ask Oscar to put the second slide up, which focuses on some of the actual psychological effects, the emotional impact. That's slide 1, no?
Second. No? Yes.
I'd like to read something to you and to our audience while we're working on the slide. Would that be okay?
Was that it? It's so small, I can't tell. That's the second slide. Can you put it back up?
Okay.
I'm not talking to myself here. I'm talking to Oscar.
We know that. We know that. We didn't think you were talking to yourself yet.
So this here gives you an idea of the actual psychological effects. Again, the show's being recorded, so you'll have access to it. You can save it and print it. But Dr. Rappoport, Evelyn, she was talking about the 16-day studies following the 16-day shutdown in 2013, which was less than half as long, obviously. So again, for those who are scientifically oriented and into research, you would ask a logical question: how do you know what the impact is? I mean, again, we had this 16-day period of time to review this, and there were extensive studies done back then that we learned certainly much about how the population was affected. These were surveys that were conducted, and there were many companies and many associations that were doing this. And we also, following this shutdown, there's already a tremendous effort. So you have it. You have some of the symptoms there, Evelyn. You were talking about a sense of insecurity, feelings of sense of loss of control. You don't know if you're going to keep your job, not keep your job, be able to put food on the table. Things about the after effects of the shutdown that I believe are going to last for years and years and years. As a psychologist specializing in trauma, I've witnessed this in patients with PTSD and depression following traumatic incidents. It doesn't go away. It stays with you for years and years and years. We're going to take a short break now. And Evelyn, you said that you had some quotes that you wanted to talk about. So we're going to continue with the facts and some of those quotes when we come back from a short commercial break.
Wonderful.
La Tribuna Hispana USA es el periódico para los que leemos en español. En circulación desde 1988 en Long Island y New York City. Contamos con diferentes ediciones por zonas, impresas y digitales, donde usted puede leer las últimas noticias nacionales, internacionales y publicar sus anuncios para la comunidad. Atención empresarios, comerciantes y profesionales, si usted desea aumentar sus ventas, llame ahora mismo al 1-888-900-2811, extensión 4, o visítenos en el www.latribunahispana.com. Escucha Tribuna Radio las 24 horas del día. Tribuna Radio desde cualquier lugar del mundo. Tribuna Radio en el www.tribunaradio.us. Tribuna Radio, la música que quieres escuchar. Tribuna Radio, la mejor programación. Tribuna Radio, programas de entrevistas. Para más información, llámanos al 1-888-900-2811, extensión 5, o escríbenos a sales@tribunaradio.us.
Tribuna TV te invita a, si quieres ser el productor de tu propio programa de televisión, para así formar parte de la programación de Tribuna TV, rentando tu espacio en nuestra programación, como lo han hecho nuestros productores asociados. Para más información, llámanos al 1-888-928-11, extensión 7, o visítanos en la web al www.tribunatv.us.
Sigue en sintonía de nuestra programación.
Okay, so we're back. I just wanted the viewers to be clear on what a psychological impact or what a psychological effect is. You know, we've heard about the number of people affected, we've heard about financial consequences, but when I talk about the impact, the psychological impact, the emotional repercussion, I'm talking about a person who consequently is feeling depressed. And I don't mean just a casual kind of passing light depressed. I'm talking about a clinical depression, something that stays with you. You don't want to get out of bed. You don't take care of your appearance. You've stopped caring about things. You harbor feelings of helplessness, hopelessness, pervasive anxiety. You have this sense of overwhelming doom. Something's going to happen to you. This is what I mean by the emotional consequences. Children who are having problems at school, behavioral changes, crying spells. These are the emotional consequences. So welcome back, Evie, and I'm giving it back to you.
Okay, so we have a number of examples, but I want to say what you are describing is shutdown in the nervous system. And time has no meaning, no motivation. It's what we call hypoarousal, which leads to fatigue, apathy, listlessness, anxiety.
Hypo's too little as opposed to hyper. Too little.
I'm sorry?
Hypo is too little.
Too little. The energy, it's like the air has gone out of the balloon and there's a total collapse inwardly. So people have lost connections, they've lost their responsivity to other people. It's like an internal deadness that occurs. And it is severe and can be very long acting. Now, even once the government opens and jobs are restored, the recovery doesn't necessarily translate to the people affected. So some may not be even able to go back to work, even if they wanted to. And the level of medical expenses in these households exponentially soars. Let me give you an example of something very personal. Steve Reeves, who was an official in Fort Worth, talked about the stress from the shutdown, and he said it reminded him of combat. Me and the family argued more. I was moody and short-tempered. Luckily for me, I'm a retired soldier, and my family has dealt with levels of work anxiousness before. It was really similar to my combat deployments. So, he writes, my PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder from his military duties, was barely in check and was exacerbated and became more challenging than normal as a result of this shutdown. This is where the effects of the shutdown sort of collapse into other events that have led to PTSD, and it's an exponential increase. It is not a one-per-one.
Let me ask you as a hypothetical.
Sure.
Because we're talking about PTSD that already existed in somebody,
yes.
And as a result of this stress, it reactivated a somewhat more dormant or more stable PTSD. You don't get over PTSD, I don't think. I think it's something that stays with you, and you have ups and downs, and it waxes and wanes.
Exactly.
But as a hypothetical, somebody who worked at a high-risk job monitoring the airlines, air traffic controller. And we don't hear this, we're not there. But can you imagine, say, because of staff shortages, somebody, hypothetical, who sees a potential crisis in the sky brewing, couldn't that in and of itself cause an acute PTSD reaction?
It can, an acute, perhaps even impulsive moving into trying to mitigate a threat, which has not yet happened. You see, that's one possibility. But the other possibility is somebody is so shut down, they don't recognize a potential threat when they see it. So it can work in both directions.
We have heard people who were interviewed. Obviously, the news media, they reached out, they sought people. There were people who voluntarily came in for interviews, and we've heard their dilemmas. What we didn't hear the dilemmas of well over 1 million people. We didn't hear the dilemmas of the hundreds of thousands of immigrants who have cases pending in immigration courts that were all canceled because of the shutdown, and they're not going to have their cases heard until 2012. We didn't hear about these people. We didn't hear the people that work in parks and what it was like going back to work, picking up trash, and the vandalism that took place. So there's a lot of people we didn't hear from. We just know a little bit. We know not even a tip of the iceberg.
I think we're going to hear more and more about that the longer, a little bit further removed we are from the events, because once trust is broken, recovery is very hard to come by, and the sense of safety that once may have existed is totally gone. So you're going to find in both directions people being very activated or people not responding well enough and it can happen in one individual as well. So multiply that by how many people at least who were affected this way. You know, one other person said, this I think really captures it. He acknowledged crying, a 32-year-old crying, and for weeks, and no longer feeling valued because of the shutdown stress. And what he said was, I have lost the dignity of public service. I've lost the honor. That is an internal collapse that restoring a person to work cannot restore in and of itself.
That goes to the core of self-worth.
Of self-worth, right. I have lost the honor that I once really felt in the job that I was doing.
What must it have felt like for employees to have had to go to food lines, to get online food line, banks, to ask for food on a daily basis? What must that have done to their self-image, self-esteem, and to the children who were seeing this on TV and or were accompanying them?
I mean, even Christmas, there were many who didn't have money for not only for gifts, but for food sufficiently at the very beginning. And there was no real help available at the very beginning. So it just hit everybody like a tornado.
Is it possible that there's going to be an anniversary effect, December 22 of this year?
What you're talking about is an effect that occurs. It's called an anniversary effect because the day something happens, that particular day is embedded in the nervous system. So people hold on to the smells of the day, to what happened that day, and then when the anniversary comes up, they show evidence of all the symptoms that they had at the time.
And it's such a major holiday. It's such a major holiday that that's going to stay with people every year.
Negativity, right, that gets really embedded and takes a long time for that to heal. Healing can only take place through connections that are lost in this and the resources that are lost when such an event happens. You know, any sense of hope and optimism is harder to restore once these negative feelings and thoughts have entered into the nervous system of each individual, in individual people, in families, in groups, and it takes a lot to come out of that. So there's a lot of preventative work that can be done to avoid the impact of anniversary reactions, but we'll get to that, I believe, a little bit later. One more quote by some psychologist in southern Florida who wrote that about her patients being traumatized by the government shutdown. For many of them, she said, it brings back past traumatic events and things that have gone on for them previously. For example, if you take a person who's working hard to provide for their family, and their upbringing, which we don't know about, may have been that of not having food on the table or not having resources, they are feeling like they did when they were 10 years old without having food on the table and having to scramble for it again. That state of experience comes whooshing back in, and they are no longer feeling the feelings of an adult who has options, but the helplessness reigns supreme. Interestingly, her name is Dr. Bushman, and her husband is also a federal agent who's been forced to work without pay. And she wrote that being able to share that experience with clients has helped her connect with them in a deeply personal way. The connectivity is where the healing can take place, by the way. So I just thought to share this with you as well. It's a powerful example of what we're talking about.
I know you've worked with children. I don't think we've focused too much. At least I haven't seen it too much in the news. The impact on children.
Because nobody wants to talk about this.
What kinds of effects?
The effects: sleeplessness, night terrors, and children have night terrors sometimes just because of the stages that they're going through. But these are real terrors that get exacerbated through anxiety. And when children have to go to sleep, if they don't feel a sense of safety holding them, this is going to come out in the middle of the night. Crying, nightmares, activation, feeling lost often happens. And what we see in kids is this kind of daze. They're operating in a daze, so things don't have much meaning, and time has no meaning. So the past, the present, it all gets mushed together, and they're very disoriented. We see that with lots of children. Trauma affects the nervous system of adults, the children in adults, and their own children as well. So this is a loop that keeps on going. And the kids often can stop functioning academically. They can have a sense of joylessness, whereas once they may have felt joy. One father spoke about the fact that he had to take his child out of a cheerleader club because he couldn't afford to pay for it. That child was devastated. She didn't have a clue that it was because of the shutdown. She just knew she couldn't participate. So these are the kinds of impacts, serious impacts, that we are going to hear a lot more about as this information is being gathered.
I'm particularly sensitive and concerned about children because, it's not like children are just little people. They're maturationally different levels, their cognitive development, their brain function, their brain development is very different.
A level that cannot absorb this information the way an adult can. Even adults.
The children depend. The first line of defense for them are their parents. They look at the parents.
Exactly.
So witnessing parents being nervous and overhearing things, children, and certainly the younger children, live in a magical world, and all of a sudden that magical world is collapsing, and they're seeing their parents with these anxieties, and it has to be something that they wonder, did they do something to cause this? What's their role in this? What's happening? And it has to be a very frightening place.
Exactly right. It's terrifying. Frightening. It doesn't even begin to explain the depth of the terror, because their world collapses. If their parents cannot withstand some of this without, and who can, without anxiety. Listen, you had people calling mortgage companies the day before things were due to beg for extensions. You had people on food lines, as you said. You had people who had to beg for help. Now, you know, the other side, though, is what we have seen are remarkable acts of what I would call heroes who come forth, and even if they have so little, they're helping their neighbors. They're helping their friends who are in the same boat. And when you see that happening, that is the one thing I think that can restore our faith.
Evelyn, one more question before we take a quick break, and then we'll look at some efforts at recovery. But essentially, when we're looking at health factors, I know that I was concerned about it, and I wrote about it also when I heard that a woman had to ration her insulin because she didn't have enough money to buy it. You can ration insulin. I mean, you have to take the correct dose, or you're not getting the necessary insulin to keep you alive. And if you're insulin dependent, you need the insulin to live. Absolutely. And I'm sure that we have people besides diabetics who are suffering. So we heard about insulin dependent victims, but there were a lot of health consequences. And I just wanted to ask you what some of those health consequences might be, including, sleeplessness, diet problems, and so forth.
Right. What you're talking about is the physiology of what happens in the nervous system as the stress increases. And whatever is needed to keep a person stable, like heart issues, diabetic issues, muscular issues, if people can't get the medication and in a timely way, they begin to deteriorate. Their whole nervous system begins to deteriorate, and the health issues exponentially rise. I saw a woman talking about the fact that A, she couldn't get her medication, but B, she couldn't even get the gas to get into her car to pick up the medication, even if it was available. These are the kinds of...
So there were multiple barriers.
Absolutely. And people don't think about that. You hear, okay, so somebody can't get their medication in time. Well, that can be the difference between life and death sometimes. Okay. And that's what you're talking about.
All right,
there are many cases like this.
We're going to take another short commercial break, and we'll come back and look at kinds of things that we suggest or that we know from our experience as traumatologists to help with the recovery.
La Tribuna Hispana USA es el periódico para los que leemos en español. En circulación desde 1988 en Long Island y New York City. Contamos con diferentes ediciones por zonas, impresas y digitales, donde usted puede leer las últimas noticias nacionales, internacionales y publicar sus anuncios para la comunidad. Atención empresarios, comerciantes y profesionales. Si usted desea aumentar sus ventas, llame ahora mismo al 1-888-900-2811, extensión 4, o visítenos en el www.latribunahispana.com. Escucha Tribuna Radio las 24 horas del día. Tribuna Radio desde cualquier lugar del mundo. Tribuna Radio en el www.tribunaradio.us. Tribuna Radio, la música que quieres escuchar. Tribuna Radio, la mejor programación. Tribuna Radio, programas de entrevistas. Para más información, llámanos al 1-888-900-2811, extensión 5, o escríbenos a sales@tribunaradio.us.
Tribuna Tribuna TV. Te invita a, si quieres ser el productor de tu propio programa de televisión, para así formar parte de la programación de Tribuna TV, rentando tu espacio en nuestra programación, como lo han hecho nuestros productores asociados. Para más información, llámanos al 1-888-928-11, extensión 7, o visítanos en la web al www.tribunatv.us.
Sigue en sintonía de nuestra programación.
Okay, welcome back. I want to focus on some things now that we can suggest or recommend to assist in the emotional recovery. And I think that we can look at doing this in three different levels, or three avenues of assistance. One is, what can the person who's affected do to help him or herself? What can we do to help the individual? What can employers do? Because you were talking, Evie, about people maybe not feeling ready to go back to work, or being devalued at work, or I was a lower class employee because I was furloughed without pay. I was forced to work without pay, but I had to go to work. Does that mean I'm different than those who are taking a furlough and supposedly getting a little vacation time? So I'm sure a lot of that stress. What can employers do to help with recovery? And the third component, what can societal agencies, organizations, healthcare facilities, psychologists, other organizations do to help with the recovery? So starting with individuals, post-traumatic growth, emotional first aid, Evelyn, what can you recommend?
Look, we can do a lot in multiple ways. But let me tell you one thing that I think doesn't happen that we can do immediately. Whenever you see someone who is at that level of work, who has been furloughed, if you stop and thank them for their service and for their courage, that in and of itself, that level of appreciation that they don't get from people.
A word of kindness.
Is healing.
A word of kindness every now and then.
An appreciation for the sacrifices they have made. That is the kindest, biggest thing we can all do. You're going to the airport. You have to go through security. Thank the people who are working there. Their jobs are horribly difficult. Do we ever thank these people? Just as a matter of course? You know, you hear people in the military, thank you for your service. Well, why is this any different? So right away, I'm telling you, if every person does that with one person, the value of healing just radiates out. And kindness is just that. So that's one thing immediately that I think we can all do. On an individual level, you know, I see people who have been traumatized as my social responsibility. Sometimes we volunteer to help people pro bono for a certain amount of time to help them begin to heal from the traumas, because counseling and trauma work on an individual basis is really powerful, but people can't afford it. So if organizations provide funding for this kind of
that's part of what a society can do.
Absolutely. It would be an immense help. And in terms of companies and corporate structures, they're capable of doing that. It's a question of setting up the right funding and the right channels. So you were about to say something, Roy.
I think, Oscar, could you put up the last slide, the third slide, just so that the viewers are able to, when it's recorded, they can make a copy of it. Okay, so I have a breakdown of what individuals can do, employers, and society. So again, apologies that it's so tight, but you're certainly welcome to copy it and print it sometime later. So getting back to individuals, I think that people need to get back to their lives. They need to, in some ways, be able to socialize once again, maintain contact with support systems, get back to their hobbies, sort of like try to pick up pieces. It's called pre-morbid functioning, going back to pre-trauma kinds of life, resuming things of interest. We were talking about health problems, so obviously you need to take care of your health.
Medical care.
This is the time to, go to your doctor, get a medical, make sure you have your health needs taken care of. I know that I heard sadly, that there were so many people affected by the shutdown who were really living hand to mouth. In other words, my understanding is that the workers missed two paychecks.
Yep.
One paycheck for many was already an overwhelming amount of time. So imagine two paychecks, and they were literally they had no money. What am I going to do to pay rent, buy food? So I don't have the answers for you, but I think that you need to do something to work on budgeting. There has to be some ability for a family to sit down and really take a close look at their budgeting, at their financial needs, their financial situation, and do something to put a little bit of money aside and not touch it and save it for a rainy day. I think that this is good advice for really everybody, everybody in Middle America.
Right. And as a matter of course, this is something we should be teaching people. However, when you're talking about this situation, what I think we have to be careful about is what we call blaming the victim. The fact that there were no reserves, of course it's helpful to show people how they can prepare and have some assets available in an emergency in the future. That is what you're talking about, and that's wonderful. But to put people in a position where they feel responsible because they didn't have reserves, I think there's some truth to it, but that's not where the responsibility lies in this situation. The responsibility lies in the government and what they can do to help people learn to prepare. So if they were going to provide financial counseling, let's say, without people having to go to someone and pay them for it directly, that I think would be amazing and helpful. But it has to be done with dignity and with an understanding that this kind of emergency, it shouldn't happen. So, of course, we have to plan for emergencies, but when the unimaginable becomes our reality, that's where the actual problem is. So,
I've lived long enough that I've lived long enough that I've heard that this shouldn't happen, that shouldn't happen, but unfortunately it does. We've heard about mass shootings. Obviously, this is not a mass shooting.
It's a different world.
But we've heard of mass shootings. We've heard of earthquakes. We've heard of floods. Just days ago, didn't California have more flooding? So yes, it's something that we try not to. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen to me. It's something that I think we need to be very careful and not think it's not going to happen to me. I need to be prepared if and when it does happen to me, because it could happen to me. Exactly. So this is a good time for reflection.
Emergency preparedness.
And part of post-traumatic growth. What is post-traumatic growth?
I'm sorry?
What's post-traumatic growth?
Post-traumatic growth is, we are wired to heal, but trauma gets in the way. Post-traumatic growth is about resiliency and flexibility. And when you come out of a trauma cycle, at the point, some people, it takes longer than others, but at the point that flexibility comes into the picture and people begin to pick up their lives, you see a tremendous resiliency to move forward and not keep the past with them as a burden, but rather learn from the past.
It creates a
And that is
protective
what
shield. It's a protective shield going forward.
Going forward, with the right emphasis from the mental health communities, with professional counseling like financial preparedness. I think you did a whole piece on emergency preparedness, I believe, and what people need to consider. I think you actually had a whole protocol for that at some point.
Well,
And I think
viewers
that
are
was
certainly
amazing.
welcome to contact me. You can contact me, and you're certainly welcome and invited to contact Dr. Rappoport as well for further feedback. I think that that's important because it's only so much we can do in an hour program. I did also want to emphasize that employers need to look at what workplace programs exist. What kinds of activities does the employer provide that could help recovery? What employee assistance programs exist, if any? And workers need to look at what their employers offer and perhaps have the courage to ask for certain kinds of activities or events that help protect them if they don't see the employer offering this. But the workplace, as I see it, and you were talking about this, not to blame the victim, what can the workplace do to create workplace programs to help? And society, we've been talking about that as well. Mental health, free counseling, first aid counseling, trauma kinds of interventions, going to speak to schools, to agencies, to employers. Being invited to and going and volunteering your service to help them set up programs or talk about these kinds of things.
Absolutely. So the last thing I want to say about this is what is healing is facilitating people to reconnect to their resources, because that is what's broken in trauma. So it's exactly what you're saying. But even within companies, employers can provide what I like to call healing circles for people to form together, to work on what they need. And I think it can be done broadly, or it can be done in smaller institutions. It can be done with children, promoting healing circles where they can find a way to express what they have experienced with each other, with a guided leader who can help them metabolize the trauma.
Yeah, the important thing is not to hold it in, not to keep it in. You have to be able to talk about it, reach out, seek help. Neighbors who didn't suffer as much as another neighbor who works for the federal government should reach out to them and support them. This is a time that we all need to come together as one. If we want to call ourselves a United States of America, let's be united. I think that that's very, very important. We need to reach out and support, and people hopefully have the resources to try to talk about it. And I hope that this program in some way offers some encouragement and educational service to the community. We're ending now. I did want to thank Dr. Evelyn Rappoport. Again, when I invite her again, she'll bring another half hour of her many accomplishments to us. So certainly feel free to contact her. She's listed on the internet. You already know who I am. You can contact me. The show is reachable here through 1-888-900-2811, extension 6. I wanted to thank the producer of the show, my good friend Emilio Ruiz. I wanted to thank the tech person here sitting in front of me, Oscar Luna, and Ezequiel Peña, who's actually in El Salvador. So gracias, thank you. I really hope that you'll find that this program is useful. I encourage you to contact me if you have questions. Our next show will be next Thursday, February 28th, with 3 invited attorneys as guests. Thank you very much.
Thank you.